don't assume when two people are together that the man is always in charge. And I think that that has been a lesson for me, which was for so long, I just kind of hid in the background. But it also never forced people to change their assumptions, which meant that the next woman who was in the same situation was the exact same situation, the woman after that. But somebody has to say, actually, let's draw the line here and let's make it awkward, correct the assumption, and the next time they'll ask, like, which person should I be speaking to? Who's the decision maker? Even in the back of their head.
Welcome to Wealth Coherence. I'm your host, Emily Bouchard, a social worker specializing in human development and fascinated by human potential. For over 20 years, I've been a coach to families with successful businesses and leaders with successful careers, and you may be surprised to learn that true wealth is about coherence, when our inner state of being aligns with how we live, give, lead, and love. In this series, we will explore an integrated model to flourish coherently, because wealth isn't what we have, it's who we are when we are fully aligned. Welcome to this episode of Wealth Coherence. I'm your host, Emily Bouchard, and I am so thrilled to get to introduce you today to a phenomenal woman that we are going to really dive into the whole concept of what does it mean to be a powerful woman who can be a powerful leader, powerful mother, with a really wonderful relationship. I had a chance to meet your husband, and to really be authentic with who you are internally when faced with some external challenges, especially in a male-dominated field. So I'd like to introduce Deb Liu. And Deb, if you could share a little bit about your background so people understand what I mean by a male-dominated field that you have been playing in.
Great. It's wonderful to be here, Emily. I started my career, I actually studied in engineering school at Duke, and I just remember walking into physics class and there were 5 women and like 70 guys. And I thought, whoa. It never occurred to me that women weren't engineers. I guess my dad was, my sister was, and I figured I'd follow in their footsteps. And I think it was a huge wake-up call for me my freshman year. Powered through engineering school, ended up in consulting, and so did consulting for a couple of years, then went to business school. Also, lots of men in the field relative to women back in the day. It was over 20 years ago. And then eventually I ended up in tech, which was the ride of my life. I had such an amazing time, but definitely tech, also a male-dominated field. And so I felt like I spent most of my career in that, but I also felt like I thrived in that environment because I don't think that gender is something I thought that much about. But it was something which was in the back of my mind. But also, I had a secret superpower, which is I could see things that other people couldn't see. I guess I'm best known as the founder of Facebook Marketplace during my time at Meta. And it was because I could see a world where, I would sell this. I was talking to the chief product officer, and they were like, why would anyone want to buy anything on Facebook? I'm like, I buy and sell tons of things on Facebook. And sometimes you just have a very unique perspective. And I think I have a perspective that's really different. And so that is something that's very, very important is, lean into what your strength is, which might be very, very different than other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you worked with somebody who lean in was kind of her, her MO, right? And I think that's a powerful thing too, that you had Sheryl was a powerful female mentor, femtor in that space too. What did you glean or get from, working directly with her and within that space? It'd be great to hear.
Well, I just remember after a meeting, the one thing about Sheryl, if you've ever worked with her, is she is somebody who is very good about giving you feedback. And she feels like women don't get enough feedback. And so she's very conscious of giving feedback to women. And after one of these meetings, she pulled me aside and she said, we can stop fighting now. You've won. I just had a very combative personality. Like I was always the underdog. I was always counted out. I used that underdog mentality to actually be rocket fuel for me. But as I wrote in my book, rocket fuel will burn you up if it's not used correctly. And that made me very much not collaborative. I was all about like, no, I believe in this thing. I'm going to get it done despite everyone else's objections. And I realized that didn't make me the best collaborator and it didn't make me the best leader. And I had to work on that. And that's what she was saying to me, which is, once you reach that place and you're the leader, you can't be the underdog anymore. Now you have to lead in a very different way. And I do think that was a huge turning point in my career for sure.
That's great to hear. And I definitely want to get back to your book because I think it's really important for people to know about it. But I think that in terms of the people that I work with and what I've seen in terms of this, when you're a part of a family enterprise, a family business, and you are suddenly put into this position of, oh, I have a role within the business. I'm going to be a leader in this business. You can't keep maintaining that, oh, but I have a sibling rivalry, or I was always like treated poorly by my, it's like, no, you have to take on a whole other persona if you're going to be a leader. I love that she said that to you, and that you were able to take that on. So would you share a little bit more about your book? And then we're going to talk about your TEDx talk, which is so fantastic too.
So I read this book, Take Back Your Power, 10 New Rules for Women at Work. And I wrote it because I've been speaking at this professor's class, so Professor Pfeffer at Stanford. And I've been speaking his class for the last, I think now almost 10 years. So 2015 was my first time. And each year he wrote the book Power, and it was a very, very successful book. He also wrote the 7 Rules of Power. And he, all the women in the class would ask me, well, can we do the things in this book? And I said, no, not in the same way as men do. It's a very different permission structure for women. And so one day I was joking, I was like 4 or 5 years in, I said, I'm going to write the companion book to this. And I kind of put it off. And finally I said, it's pretty embarrassing to keep coming to this class saying I'm going to write this book. I really need to write this book. So I wrote this book and launched it. And, it was a lot of stories of women who, led their own way. And it wasn't always the same way as other people lead. And that's okay. And it's like, how do you actually carve your own path? And how do you, create opportunity? And so, a lot of what I wrote about were lessons that I learned along the way, the hard way, so that hopefully the next generation doesn't have to face the same issues.
Oh, thank you for that. I appreciate you doing that. And I think it's so needed. And I definitely been focusing a lot on how to think about a holistic approach to who we are in the world, where it's not like women versus men or having to be in this polarized way of thinking about it. And I think it's really important to say we are distinctly different in our personalities, in our makeup, and also how the culture views us. And to be told, oh, this is power. If you just do these things of power, it's like, well, no, a woman doing that is not going to be respected in the same way, and for whatever reason, our culture still has that. And we have to be aware of the dynamics that we're in and the culture that we're in the work environment, in the society, in our families. And it's okay to think about it in terms of there's different but equally useful and practical ways of doing it. And I think
absolutely.
your TEDx talk that just came out recently, Deb and I met giving our TED Talks together. The talk blew me away. I was taking notes. I thought it was fantastic. And I've started using the hashtag Let's Make It Awkward. And I was wondering, could you share a little bit about the evolution of that, how you came to it, and what you've seen as a result by choosing to step into awkward situations and being willing to lean into them.
It's funny. I remember this talk. Actually, it started with this thing that happened to me. I used to go to this, payments conference. It was the biggest payments conference of the year, and I was the head of payments at Facebook. I worked at PayPal for many years, so I've been in the industry. And I show up, and I usually came with my male colleague who was the head of partnerships on my team. And, we worked together, but, I noticed something. We would start talking to people, and they would just slowly edge me out of the conversation and just be talking to him. And the thing is, like, these guys who were my partnerships leads were like my friends, and they were just so kind. But I think the person on the other side always assumed that they were the leader. And
it's unconscious, right? It's not like
they're playing the odds, right? So I think it's just they're if you're playing the odds are that they're the leader. But I would a keynote the second day. So the first day we would walk around, and the second day I would do a keynote. And suddenly people wanted to talk to me because now I was on stage and I was worth talking to. And I just remember I used to tell myself, like, don't make it awkward. Like, don't say anything. I would just nod politely. And one day I was telling the story so I started this organization called Women in Product with 30,000 members. In our New York chapter leads dinner, we were all telling stories of how we go to conferences and people just ignore us and talk to the guy who's nearest to us, and how this happens to so many women. And we're like, screw it, let's make it awkward. And, it was a mantra for me that I used, which was, it's like I was taught to be like a good girl, right? Like, don't rock the boat. And so, when people would talk over me, just like, oh, they were just trying to get a word in. And, people would assume things, right? There was one founder who was trying to sell his company to us, and, somebody who was like my skip level down said, actually, she decides whether we buy your company. And he, but I didn't want to be that person, right? I didn't want to be known as difficult, as they say.
Yep.
At the same time, if we never correct the assumptions, then they always assume that we're the assistant or we're the more junior person. Like when, no one's ever correcting the assumptions, and the assumptions will always stay. And so how do we subtly step in and actually make it awkward and say, I'm here and I'm worthy of being listened to, not just on stage, but just day to day. Don't assume when two people are together that the man is always in charge. And I think that has been a lesson for me, which was for so long, I just kind of hid in the background. But it also never forced people to change their assumptions, which meant that the next woman who was in the same situation was the exact same situation, and the woman after that. But somebody has to say, actually, let's draw the line here and let's make it awkward, correct the assumption. And the next time they'll ask, like, which person should I be speaking to? Who's the decision maker? Even in the back of their heads.
Yeah. And it's so important, right? Because by willing to step into what's true, what's so in that moment, you actually could be an invitation for somebody seeing newly and a way that then they could take responsibility too. What are some ways that you've approached the awkward situations where you wake somebody up, but in a way that actually furthers the relationship with them, as opposed to them like wanting to climb under the table?
Well, I think often I used to just live up to the assumption or live down to the assumption. Just don't say anything, don't rock the boat. But even just saying, hey, like this, just we call it grabbing the marker when you're in the room. It's like having a moment of authority where people say, oh, she is somebody who's worthy of being listened to. She is in charge. Mm-hmm. Often I left it up to someone else in the room, or I didn't say anything at all. But I think if we just subtly say, in a meeting where we were with a consulting firm, and the partner on the other side, when he heard that I was the CEO of Ancestry, he looked visibly shocked. And I could have just not said anything, but instead I just said, hey, by the way, as we're hiring you to do X, like, again, it was not to embarrass him, but it was just to point out, maybe you should just not assume that, somebody who's on the phone with you is, lesser than you assume.
Yeah.
And I think he had to leave thinking that maybe that is something that he had to change in his assumption when getting on a call. Mm-hmm. And I think it's, again, not something where people do this intentionally because they're bad people, but instead it's just we're trained to assume certain things. And if you're playing the odds are, especially in tech, that the more senior person is that person.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a totally unconscious bias for sure. And when we bring it forward and we make it conscious, the first reaction somebody can have is discomfort and surprise. And I tend to find, I don't know how much you use it, but I find humor is a really disarming way to have people be able to laugh at themselves and laugh at the situation, and then also maybe remember it too. Sometimes there's a deflection where it's not so much like it's on them, but more like, oh, you're not the first one to be surprised about the fact that a woman would be in this role. Don't think that you're special in this one, but maybe you could help be the last, like some sort of way to bring that awareness, but where you get to like invite them to be part of your team. We can do this together. And I think that that's what you're really inviting. I love what you're doing. These 30,000 women in this group, like, did they really take it on? Like,
so, it's something that we talked about, and it's something which I hope that all women feel like they can speak up, that they've had the permission to say who they are and to own their position. I think sometimes by letting the assumption stand, we're actually doing a disservice to every other woman who stands in our seats.
Oh, yeah. I was in a multifamily office division of a major bank, and I started a women of this division group. I think it was during COVID. So it was like, we needed a chance to get together. So we would create like a monthly, like, everybody bring your favorite coffee cup, or everybody, what's your Christmas card look like? Just something to get to know each other and connect. And we started doing research because we created a training for the advisors in the firm on how to work with women in wealth, and really a whole section on unconscious biases. And so we polled the women in the group about what kind of unconscious biases they encountered from their male counterparts at work. And It was phenomenal, like the list of the different examples, and we put them into the training. And when we presented the training to the executive team, which was a board table filled with men, and there were 2 women around the table, and I was there showing them this, they were aghast. And they were like, did you make these up? No, we can't put this. Yes, we can't. Like, how else are people going to be aware? No, people wouldn't do. Yep, happens all the time. And it was, things as simple as 3 men and a woman from a team getting on a plane to go to a client meeting. And one of the men turning to one of the women, completely compassionate and empathetic, wondering, who's taking care of your kids?
Yes.
Look at your laugh, right? It's like,
my husband, I get asked that a lot. My husband's like, no one has ever asked me that question. And, it's true. Like I work with a lot of women executives, and one person I was doing a talk with, she's like, yeah, somebody asked me as I was boarding the plane today to come to this event, who's taking care of your kids? And the men in the room were just like, whoa, because they never get asked. And again, I just think it's the unconscious bias. When I was pregnant, people on my own team were like, are you going to come back to work after the baby? I had 3 kids at 3 different companies, and I got asked at all 3 of them. And again, it wasn't intentionally to insult anybody, but my husband goes, why would anyone ask you that? I said, well, why do you think? Because no one ever asked him. And so it is these small things where, and particularly in tech, something like 50% of women in tech leave by the time they're 35 because they feel like they don't belong. And I think sometimes these small things add up to, you don't belong here. And who is taking care of my kids? Am I doing a disservice to my children? And I have posted about what it's like to have kids and a full-time job. And a lot of people are like, well, if you really care about your kids, you would make sure they're not raised by strangers. I just don't know that my husband read some of these things. And he's like, people say that to you. And I'm like, well, it's not that uncommon, actually. And I think he's really surprised, and he's been alongside me for this entire journey.
And his disbelief really just shows that. It's a culture speaking us, right? And that's why it feels awkward to show up in a way of saying, hey, let's talk about this. Or maybe we can have a different way of thinking about this. Yeah. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. And how do you encourage other women to have the courage to speak up?
Well, I think that if we do it collectively, then it's suddenly not one person standing alone. It's everyone standing together. And so I'm hoping that this will spark more people to speak up, more people to actually say, hey, like the women sharing their experiences. I think when we make the implicit explicit, when it's implicit, it's like, oh, it's just me. But when you hear dozens of examples, one of the things I did with Women Women in Product conferences was before the conference, we did a survey. And we said, what are some of the comments you heard? And we compiled them, and they were devastating. And we read them out loud, and then we published some of them. And people are like, this can't be real. And I'm like, these are real experiences.
It's not just it's real, it's like pervasive. Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So, many, many women shared experiences where they were just treated so poorly and assumed to be, not worthy of being listened to, or they're pushed aside. And I just remember reading those and thinking, we can do better. But if nobody ever points it out, just like you were saying in this multifamily office, if nobody ever points it out to the board, to the executives, do they ever know what it's like to be a junior woman in their own organization? Do they know this is not even just happening with clients, it's happening with their peers? As you were saying, 4 people are getting on a plane. And so again, most people are not intentionally saying these things. I think it's just unconscious bias, and it's those small things that make things just a little bit harder. But if we all collectively say, hey, that's an interesting question. Who's taking care of my kids? Well, my husband has never been asked that question. And he told me last time I said, that he was wondering who was taking care of our kids too.
Well, that's great. I so appreciate your openness and willingness to bring this forward and have people think about it. And for me, it has so much to do with having a more coherent way of relating with each other and having relationships that feel much more authentic. And I really want to make sure that this isn't male bashing. And I like the fact that you said women do this to women too. And it's more about how to make this covert, almost like microaggressions, overt, so we can really address it and have a much more respectful, mutually beneficial way of relating with each other. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Wealth Coherence. If it resonated, I'd love for you to share it or leave a review. This will help others find their way to this space. And if you're ready to keep exploring what it means to live, lead, and give from a place of coherence, head to emilybouchard.com to stay connected. Until next time, be well internally and allow your external life to be the fullest expression of who you truly are.